Donald Trump has signed an executive order paving the way for direct investments in real estate to be included in 401ks. A federal appeals court has given the green light for the CFPB to slash 90% of its workforce. Jerome Powell hints at upcoming rate cuts. Summer sales hit their slowest pace in 10 years. All that and more today on Real Estate Backstage. Before we jump in, if you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify, go ahead and subscribe to the show. That way you don't miss any future episodes. And if you're looking for the show notes with links to all the articles we're going to cover today, you can find that at realestatebackstage.com/episode 36. Now, if this is your first time watching or listening, I'm your host, Michael Smith. I'm the CEO here at Bluefield. We are a 4-time Inc. 5000 company headquartered here in Greenville, South Carolina. And we provide real estate brokerage, property management, and insurance services. All right, so I want to jump in today. Let's get started with this news on the appeals court ruling on the CFPB. So you may remember that previously the CFPB tried to do a dramatic reduction in force order, laying off 90% of their staff. That was blocked by a lower court, but now an appeals court has reversed that decision. This is according to Housing Wire. Quote, the CFPB can go ahead with plans that were announced in April to fire 90% of its staff, a federal appeals court panel ruled on Friday. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit found that the district court lacked jurisdiction to consider the claims predicated on loss of employment, which must proceed through the specialized review scheme established in the Civil Service Reform Act. Staff at the CFPB were sent reduction in force notices on April 17th, but the layoffs were blocked on April 29th, allowing staff to continue working. Now, 1,500 of the agency's staff are expected to be cut, leaving only 200 workers to oversee essential offices. Exclusive Housing Wire reporting in April showed that the cuts could leave just one employee in the Office of Fair Lending and Equal Opportunity, along with an 80% reduction in enforcement staff and a 90% cut to supervision personnel, divisions that most directly impact mortgage lenders. According to the plan, the CFPB's director's office, which houses the Office of Fair Lending, would be reduced to just 5 employees from 86. The enforcement division would shrink to 50 from 248, with the Bureau shifting its focus to tangible consumer harm and deferring more oversight to state regulators. Attorney General Pam Bondi celebrated the decision in a post on X on Friday, saying the CFPB is now free to right-size itself in accordance with the law to best serve the American people, unquote. So this is a dramatic reduction in the size of the CFPB, which is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now, this agency was put into effect by the Dodd-Frank Act in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis and the subsequent Great Recession. And it was really put in place to protect consumers from unfair and discriminatory lending practices, not just from mortgage lenders, but from other lenders as well, like auto loan companies, credit card companies, etc. My perspective is you may not like everything about the CFPB. You might disagree with how it was created, some of the structural ways it's funded. It gets its funding directly from the Federal Reserve rather than from congressional allotments, which kind of makes it difficult for Congress to oversee and rein in when necessary. So you might disagree with that. However, I think we can all agree that enforcement of federal law has to come from somewhere. The CFPB has done some good work. I think enforcing those laws is very important. And like I said, that enforcement action has to come from somewhere. So in the article here, they said they're going to refer more enforcement action to the state level. A lot of states, probably most states or all states, have their own versions of these laws, these consumer protection laws. However, it's different from state to state, and there has to be an enforcement mechanism to enforce these federal laws. All right, shifting gears. It has been a full year now since the new NAR rules went into effect last August as a result of the settlement in the Sitzer-Burnett case. So we've had a full 12 months of realtors across the country implementing these new rules. And the reports seem to suggest that average commission rates are actually up. We'll get into why I think that is. But before I get into this article from Real Estate News, my attorney would want me to say that here at Bluefield Realty Group, we fully comply with all antitrust laws, and nothing in the segment should be construed as an attempt to conspire or price fix with my competitors. Don't you love that CYA language? All right, so jumping into this article from Real Estate News. Quote, last year at this time, August 17th to be exact, the real estate industry was collectively fretting as the new rules took effect, moving offers of agent compensation off MLSs and requiring agents to get signed agreements before showing homes to buyers. The changes, mandated by the National Association of Realtors' $418 million deal to settle commissions lawsuits, had buyers agents concerned about how much of a commission they would get and who would pay. A year later, it's clear not a whole lot has changed when it comes to compensation. Buyers agents are still getting paid by the home seller, and commission rates have actually increased, according to Redfin. It appears that a market shift and an uptick in activity is going to be needed to determine whether the rule changes following the agent commissions lawsuits will have much impact. The rules have changed, but market conditions favor keeping things the same. It's been a slow year for home sales. Meanwhile, inventory continues to build, so buyers can, for now, demand that sellers pay their agents' commissions. Buyers can walk away if the seller does not pay the buyer's agent commission, and they'll likely be able to find another home they like with a seller who is willing to pay what the buyer is asking for to offload their home, said Andrew Vallejo, a Redfin Premier agent in Austin, Texas, in a news release accompanying Redfin's data. That leverage is something buyers agents are using as they negotiate commissions with their clients. The agent commission for the average U.S. buyer was 2.43% this spring, up from 2.38% a year before, according to Redfin. What remains unanswered is what will happen to commission rates when the market returns to favoring sellers, unquote. So this is what I keep telling our agents here at Bluefield. I think with the new rules, we kind of got lucky that these rules went into effect as we were transitioning from a seller's market into a buyer's market. What I think the ultimate outcome of all this is going to be is that commissions, buyer's agent commissions specifically, or at least the portion paid by the seller. I want to clarify that. I don't think that this is necessarily, I don't think it necessarily has to have an impact on average commission rates by buyer's agents, but it may have an impact on the amount of that compensation that's covered by the seller in a transaction. So what I think we're going to see as a result of all this is that buyer's agent commissions paid by a seller, that percentage, that amount is going to become less sticky. So I think that that is going to fluctuate more based on market conditions. I think in the good old days, so to speak, the portion of the buyer's agent commission paid by the seller was relatively unchanged as market conditions change. So as we shift from buyer's market to seller's market, as inventory levels go up and down, I think we're going to see more volatility, more fluctuation in buyer's agent commissions paid by a seller. So what that means is as we move into a more neutral or a more buyer's market where there's more inventory, higher days on market, listings have to be more competitive, buyers have more choices, sellers get more anxious to get their home sold. That is one of the things that we're going to see is sellers more willing, more likely to pay a higher amount to a buyer's agent. However, eventually the market's going to change again because everything goes in cycles, whether that's 6 months from now, 6 years from now, who knows? But eventually we're going to get through the buyer's market. And as we enter into the next phase of the business cycle, we're going to see a seller's market again at some point in the future. And when that happens, my theory is that we're going to see the average amount of buyer's agent commission paid by a seller start to decline. I think it's going to be more volatile. It's going to fluctuate more with the market. It's going to be less sticky overall. All right, this is an interesting one. Direct investments in real estate could be coming to a 401k near you. This is according to BiggerPockets. Quote, landlords could soon be able to include their property assets in their 401k retirement plans. The White House has confirmed that President Donald Trump plans to sign an executive order dated August 7th that will allow alternative assets such as real estate to be included in 401k retirement plans. A new White House order will modify existing 401k plans to allow alternative types of assets such as real estate, cryptocurrency, and private equity to be included in retirement savings accounts, which are typically reserved for stock assets. Regarding real estate, a White House press release stated, for purposes of this order, the term alternative assets means direct and indirect interest in real estate, including debt instruments secured by direct or indirect interest in real estate. By including the terminology direct or indirect interest in real estate, the new order applies not only to traditional REITs, real estate investment trusts, which are traded on the stock market, but real estate holdings that are not publicly traded, such as private commercial or residential property investments. There still appears to be a certain amount of fine-tuning required to determine how private real estate holdings, such as rental properties, can be effectively integrated into 401k plans. Currently, many real estate investors hold their assets in Roth IRAs, specifically self-directed IRAs, with their cash flow accumulating tax-free. The new White House order directs the Labor Department to work with the Treasury Department and the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, to implement regulatory changes that allow alternative asset managers to access employer-sponsored retirement plans. As the guidelines from the Department of Labor and the SEC are not yet available, there is a waiting period, likely 6 to 18 months, before your employer or plan custodian will know precisely what they need to do to incorporate real estate investments into your 401k. There will probably be many similarities between a Roth IRA and 401ks. If your employer's plan doesn't offer private real estate, you could roll funds into a self-directed 401k or self-directed IRA that does. However, if you want to invest using individual properties, regular brokers like Fidelity or Vanguard usually won't hold a deed, so you'll probably need to use a custodian specializing in alternative assets, unquote. So this is some pretty exciting news. I know a lot of investors who use self-directed IRAs to hold real estate assets. We actually manage properties here at Bluefield for a handful of clients who own their properties in self-directed IRAs. It can be a really great wealth building tool, specifically if it's a self-directed Roth IRA, because that continues to accumulate tax-free. However, it does add a lot of complexity. You typically can't get any loans because it has to be non-recourse in order to be in a self-directed IRA. I'm imagining that's going to be the same situation with a 401k. All of the cash flow, all of the income has to go into the IRA. The expenses have to be paid out of the IRA. I'm assuming that's going to be the same thing for the 401k. So this is going to be great for maybe paid in full, free and clear properties. We'll follow this, and as more details emerge, we'll keep you guys posted. Once we get some more guidance from the Department of Labor and the SEC, we'll follow up on this. But this is exciting news, especially for our high net worth clients who have a lot of money sitting in a 401k. Maybe they're not too keen on the PE ratios right now in the stock market, and they want to move some of that money into real estate, but they don't necessarily want to do it in REITs. Maybe they want to have more direct control of choosing the property. So this could be some really exciting news for our clients, and we will keep you guys posted. All right, in other news, summer sales have hit their slowest pace in 10 years. This is according to Inman. Quote, summertime home sales have reached their most sluggish pace in the past decade as homebuyers continue to battle high costs and economic uncertainty. As of July 2025, the typical home that went under contract spent 43 days on the market, up from 35 the year before, and the longest period for days on market of any July since 2015, Redfin reported on Monday. So for those of you watching on YouTube, I've got a graph here I'm going to put on the screen so you can see the average days on market for July ever since 2012. So you can see where we are in July of 2025 here, average days on market of 43. You can see how that compares over the past decade. The last time it was this high was in July of 2015, which was 46 days on market. So you can definitely see ever since 2021, when it bottomed down at only 16, that was kind of on the tail end of that post-COVID craziness when the market was just absolutely insane. Days on market went super, super low. But you can see ever since then, it's been climbing every single year. And we're at the point now where days on market for the summertime sales is the longest it's been in the past decade. All right, going back to the article. Pending sales dropped by 1.1% from June to July of 2025 to their lowest seasonally adjusted rate since November of 2023. Meanwhile, existing home sales hit their lowest level in nearly a year at a seasonally adjusted annual rate of 4.15 million. Supply is starting to fall because prospective sellers are choosing not to list after seeing their neighbor's home linger on the market or sell for below the asking price. Redfin senior economist Asad Khan said in the statement. Some existing sellers are also pulling their homes off the market, opting instead to rent their house out or hold off on a move altogether, especially if they bought at the peak of the pandemic market and are worried about taking a loss. The withdrawal of some sellers from the market is also leading to acceleration in home price growth, with the median home sales price up 1.4% year over year in July to $443,867, a new median sales price record for the month of July. By contrast, home price growth at the beginning of 2025 was shrinking. All right, this is a really important point that I want to drive home here. Home prices tend to be very sticky. You'll see a lot of doomers on the internet say that home prices are about to crash, the real estate market is crashing, home prices are going to go down. Yes, that could happen. I don't want to give you the impression that home prices are always just up and to the right. Sometimes we do see corrections. However, home prices tend to be very sticky relative to other asset classes. It is very rare to see real estate prices trend down it's especially rare to see them trend down for a prolonged period of time. And that's because homeowners typically, if they think they're going to have to take a loss or sell for significantly less than what they think their home is worth, they will tend to either just stay put, not move at all, or keep their home as a rental rather than selling for too low. That is dramatically different from other asset classes. If you own a stock, if you buy a stock and it goes down in value, you're much more likely to cut your losses and sell that stock at a lower price rather than hang on to it. When it comes to real estate, people tend to be more stubborn, and that's why we see home prices are very sticky. And supply and demand are really intertwined because a lot of sellers are also buyers. So the real estate market is really unique in that way. So that is why we tend to see home prices continuing to trend up, even when we see the number of transactions drop dramatically. You say that the real estate market is in a recession, and that's true. The number of sales is way down. The number of commission dollars is down. However, home prices are still trending upward, and that's because it's a function of supply and demand. And if prices are going to go too low, you just don't have that supply. That supply evaporates. People pull their home off the market rather than selling for a loss. All right, so let's shift gears over to new construction. This is according to Inman. Quote, housing starts and building permits for single-family homes experienced a slight boost in July, even as builders continue to battle economic headwinds. Building permits for privately owned housing units overall declined, dipping 2.8% below the June 2025 rate and 5.7% below the July 2024 rate to a seasonally adjusted annual rate of 1.354 million, according to the U.S. Census Bureau and U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Single-family building permits saw modest growth during July, hitting a rate of 870,000, up 0.5% from the previous month, but still down 7.9% year over year. Despite a modest uptick after a 4-month streak of declines, single-family permits, a leading indicator of future construction, remain near their lowest levels since March of 2023, signaling continued weakness in the sector. First American Deputy Chief Economist Odetta Kushi said in a statement emailed to Inman. Lower demand is dissuading builders from breaking ground on new projects. More than 1/3 of builders are now using price cuts to try and attract buyers, and 2/3 are trying a variety of incentives, according to a National Association of Home Builders survey released on Monday. The nation desperately needs more homes that are affordable, but home construction is depressed and is only likely to get worse in the months to come. Housing starts and completions are on track to be barely above 1.4 million for this year, and building permits have fallen below that anemic level, meaning next year could be even worse for home building. The United States needs roughly 2 million new homes a year built to keep up with demand and need, but builders aren't going to boost production at a time when costs are rising and mortgage rates remain so high that buyers are scared to purchase anything right now, unquote. So we've talked about this at length on the show in several episodes before. We are just not building enough new homes in the United States. The fundamentals are just not there. The incentive structure is just not there for the builders to build the amount of product that we need. So a lot of this needs to be tackled at the local level with state and local governments, making it easier and less expensive for builders to and developers to acquire property, rezone property, put in infrastructure, maybe some adjustments to code requirements and things like that. Obviously, you don't want to get too lax on the requirements and the regulations. Obviously, regulations are important. I think if you're going to deregulate, it has to be done in a smart way. You don't just want to go in and slash 80% of the regulations indiscriminately without actually paying attention to what you're cutting or what you're changing. Obviously, we want to protect the environment. We want to plan our cities and our counties in a smart way. We need to have infrastructure that makes sense. You want to have codes to make sure that builders are building safe homes. Those things are important, but there needs to be something that changes in order for us to actually build the product that we need to keep up with population growth, because we are just dramatically underbuilt in this country. And that really is the crux of the issue in the housing shortage in general. All right, shifting gears, the battle over mandatory NAR membership heads to the appeals court. This according to Real Estate News. Quote, a Texas lawsuit challenging mandatory membership policies that was dismissed last month will now be headed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. The case is the third involving the National Association of Realtors that was dismissed in July and is now being appealed. In an emailed statement, a NAR spokesperson said they believe the courts correctly dismissed the claims. NAR is focused on delivering unparalleled value to our members, developing resources that empower local associations, and fostering a fair, competitive, and transparent real estate market. We will continue to make our case on appeal in each instance, the spokesperson said, unquote. So if you haven't been following any of these stories, essentially across the country, a handful of people have sued NAR, the National Association of Realtors, and some of these state and local NAR affiliated associations for what they call their three-way agreement. And that is when you go to join your local realtor association, you have to join at both the state, local, and national level all at the same time. So for example, if you're here in Greenville, South Carolina, you can't just go join GGAR, the Greater Greenville Association of Realtors. In order to join GGAR, you are also joining SCAR, South Carolina Association of Realtors, and NAR, the National Association of Realtors. Now, personally, I don't understand what the big deal is because the barrier to entry is super low here. It's not like this is a huge cost of doing business. Maybe it's different in other states, but in my area here, it's only $575 per year to be a member of all three of those associations. And you might say, well, I get value at the local level, but I don't get anything from my state association. I don't get anything from the national association. Typically, I think it's at the state level that the contracts and forms are provided. A lot of legal support is provided more at the local level. More of the lobbying is done, I think, a lot of times at the state level. But NAR is the largest lobbying organization in the country, so there's a lot of money being spent at the national level for NAR to push real estate friendly legislation. And just frankly, the release of liability that was negotiated as part of the settlement is really, really important. A lot of people don't think about this if you're not a broker owner. If you're just a real estate agent at a company, you might not really think of this. If you're at a company, maybe an independent company or one of these companies that was not negotiated separately, you have the release of liability that was included in the NAR settlement. So I believe $2 billion a year in annual sales in calendar year 2023. Any company that did less than $2 billion in sales, where the principal broker is a member of NAR, that whole company now has this shield from liability that was negotiated as part of the NAR settlement. So there is actually tremendous value in that, of your brokerage not having to spend the time and the money to battle all these copycat lawsuits. So that is something to keep in mind as well. But essentially, there's a handful of these lawsuits that have sprung up across the country, people suing both NAR and their state and local associations over this three-way agreement because they want to be able to join their local realtor association without joining NAR. Now, these have pretty much all been dismissed and they're now going to appeal. So we are going to keep an eye on these stories and see how they develop. All right, President Trump's battle against the Federal Reserve is continuing to heat up. This is according to RIS Media. Quote, President Trump is demanding the resignation of Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook following the FHFA Director Bill Pulte's push to have her investigated for criminal mortgage fraud. Trump posted, Cook must resign now, with 3 exclamation points on Truth Social, with a link to the Bloomberg article reporting on Pulte's criminal referral letter on Cook that he sent to the Attorney General Pam Bondi, which Pulte also shared to social media. Pulte claimed in the letter that Cook has, quote, falsified bank documents and property records to acquire more favorable loan terms, potentially committing mortgage fraud under the criminal statute. Pulte claims that Cook falsified resident statuses in order to receive lower mortgage rates and better loan terms for her properties in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Atlanta, Georgia. He alleged that Cook appeared to have acquired mortgages that do not meet certain lending requirements and could have received favorable loan terms under fraudulent circumstances. According to screenshots of documents shared by Pulte on his social media, a method of communication he has often used since taking the FHFA post, Cook listed 2 properties as primary residences almost simultaneously on mortgage applications. One property was subsequently put on the rental market, according to the screenshot. Later that day, the Federal Reserve put out a rare statement attributed to Cook, according to Bloomberg News, in which the Fed governor said she would not be bullied into stepping down, while also promising to answer legitimate questions regarding her financial history. Trump's post and criminal referral come as the administration continues to pressure the Fed to lower interest rates. Cook was recently in the news for her warnings about the impacts of tariffs, unquote. So this is classic Trump. You may love it, you may hate it, but this is Trump playing that classic New York real estate bully tactic. Trump is very unconventional in the way that he does politics. I think we can all agree on that. Whether you agree with his methods here or not, it is definitely unconventional. Trump is not afraid to try and bully his way into getting what he wants. Trump wants the Fed to lower rates. So far, they have not acquiesced. Powell has been very stalwart in his position that He's not going to cut rates until the economics really dictate that that's necessary. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if Powell really held off on cutting rates too low, just out of spite and just to prove that he wasn't caving into Donald Trump. But now that Trump realizes maybe that he's not going to be able to influence Powell, he's starting to go after other Fed governors. So Lisa Cook here is the first example. Maybe we're going to see more. And maybe there are legitimate questions here. Maybe Lisa Cook really did commit mortgage fraud. It certainly looks suspicious that she submitted mortgage applications on 2 different properties very close together in time, where she listed both as her primary residence. Of course, you can only have one primary residence at a time. That's why it's called a primary residence. You can have secondary residences or additional residences or rental properties, but you can only have one primary residence at a time. So, I think if you ask a police officer, they'll say if you follow anyone around in a car for long enough, you'll see them commit some type of traffic violation. The same is probably true for a lot of people in powerful positions. If you really go digging, you're probably going to find some skeletons in their closet. So that's not to justify what she did here. If she really did commit mortgage fraud, of course, that's very bad. But the fact that they probably only found it, I would imagine, because they were digging to try and find dirt on any of these Fed governors who have been vocal about not cutting rates. So again, she may have done something wrong, but I don't necessarily know how I feel about the politicization of this, and specifically digging up dirt, trying to find skeletons in closets just to, bully people to resign so that you can get your way and install a Fed governor who's going to vote the way you want them to vote. So speaking of the Federal Reserve, Powell is now starting to signal that rate cuts may be coming. This is according to RIS Media. Quote, during his highly anticipated 8th and final speech at the annual Jackson Hole Economic Policy Symposium in Wyoming, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell signaled that the central bank is ready to ease its monetary policy. Our policy rate is now 100 basis points closer to neutral than it was a year ago, and the stability of the unemployment rate and other labor market measures allow us to proceed carefully as we consider changes to our policy stance, Powell said. Nonetheless, with policy in restrictive territory, the baseline outlook and the shifting balance of risks may warrant adjusting our policy stance. The clear signal yet ahead of the Fed September meeting, the Fed chair's remarks come as the central bank faces a complex economic landscape and mounting pressure from the administration. That's an understatement. Acknowledging how monetary policy is not on a preset course, Powell added that the Federal Open Market Committee will make these decisions based solely on their assessment of the data and its implications for the economic outlook and the balance of risks. We will never deviate from that approach, Powell said. The July employment report released earlier this month showed that payroll job growth slowed to an average pace of only 35,000 per month over the past 3 months, down from 168,000 per month during 2024, he noted. Addressing the effects of tariffs, Powell said the impact on consumer prices is now clearly visible. A reasonable base case is that effects will be relatively short-lived, a one-time shift in the price level. Of course, one time does not mean all at once, Powell said. Another possibility is that inflation expectations could move up, dragging actual inflation with them, unquote. So I'd say that the odds of a September rate cut are pretty darn good at this point. Now, there's still a chance that the Fed leaves policy unchanged, but if I had to bet, I would say that they're going to do some type of rate cut at the September meeting. Now, are we going to see 25 basis points? Are we going to see 50 basis points? I could be wrong here, but I think we're more likely to see 25 basis points. I know a lot of people are probably anticipating 50 basis points at this point, but I think we're going to see a quarter point cut. I think that's more likely. But again, that all depends on the economic data that comes out between now and then. If we see inflation continuing to move up, if we see labor market continuing to deteriorate, we could end up seeing a 50 basis point cut. I think there's plenty of people on the FOMC who feel like they would rather wait. They would rather be slower to cut or not cut as much, and then play catch up if the labor market really starts to show additional signs of weakness. With that last jobs report, we saw some dramatic downward revisions in the number of new jobs being created each month. That level is very weak. We've seen very anemic job growth so far. However, the initial weekly claims, I keep going back to this, the number of initial weekly claims is still fairly low relative to other pre-recession instances over the last several decades. Typically, we see initial weekly claims like the moving 4-week average has to be at least in the 320s, 350s, and 350,000. We've got a long way to go before we get there. Now, the continuing claims numbers are the highest they've been in several years, but the initial weekly claims numbers are still relatively low. We have not seen significant upward movement in that yet, and that is something that I really like to keep an eye on. We are starting to see what could be the peak and a little bit of a decline in residential construction workers. That sector of the labor force is typically a pretty good leading indicator. We're already seeing jobs being lost in manufacturing. We may be seeing now a downward trend in residential construction workers, so that's something to keep an eye on. The unemployment rate, the number of new jobs being created, the number of initial weekly jobless claims, these are all things that the Fed is looking at in tandem with looking at inflation. So we're going to continue to keep an eye on those numbers as they come out. But if I had to bet, I would say we're probably going to see a 25 basis point rate cut at the September Fed meeting. All right, y'all, that's a wrap for the show today. Just a reminder, you can find the show notes with links to all the articles we covered at realestatebackstage.com/episode 36. And I'll see you back here next week with another behind the scenes look at the real estate industry here on Real Estate Backstage.